Our journey begins by the explanation of a game. It's one of those mobile with an automatic system, generic AF. Blessing of Miracle. Probably choose because, of course, it's full of the top-tier waifus. Still, despite enjoying the game, our man never spent a cent and didn't even film at the end of it. Then the unthinkable happened. He was sucked into the game. As a playable character? As an NPC? No, he became a nobody, a random background figure standing still and isolated. His new name? Kangjiyama. By accident, he bumps into a girl with blue hair and freezes, clearly startled because, oh no, it's a woman. Trauma? Most likely. He awkwardly asks if she's okay and she apologizes for the inconvenience. Fortunately for him, the game setting is Korea. Names, locations, and geography are familiar, allowing him to adapt quickly. And so, for almost a year, he lives an ordinary life as a simple teenager, not even sure if this reality is a game anymore. Then one day he arrives home to his overly excited mother, who calls him the pride of the Kong clan. She hands him an acceptance letter. He's been admitted to Joaquin Academy. Annoyed, he says he already knows and begs them to stop talking about it so much. But his blurred-faced mother and the rest of the family can't stop praising him. Tomorrow is the entrance ceremony, and they're all buzzing with excitement. Sitting in his chair, he sighs. Tomorrow's the day. There's no way out. He's begged countless times to quit, but it was pointless. He stares at a photo, exhausted, muttering that this is all because of the real Kong GM, the original owner of this body. Apparently, this Kong GM passed the Academy's difficult admission test just before he took over. The parents don't know anything, but for our guy there's no excuse. Getting into this academy is insanely difficult. Was Kong GM a genius? Did he have a blessing? In this world, blessings, special abilities, are a big deal. Not everyone has one because most powers are genetic, passed down from birth. Society is structured around this. The noble, common, and privileged ranks maintain the power of the elite. Joaquin Academy was built to train heroes, exclusively for the most important families. Recently, though, they introduced special admissions, likely because they need new heroes. Maybe it's the monsters. And Kong GM? He was one of the few accepted through this new system. Our guy knows he's in trouble. This isn't his reality. This is a school for war. Training heroes here is nothing like joining the army. Grudgingly, he opens his status window. His blessing? The ability to negate pain, for 30 seconds. But the cooldown? 12 hours. Useless, he mutters, frustrated. There's one more blessing though, the blessing of the sword god. The effect is straightforward. If he attacks, it will cut. No activation limit, but there's a catch. It only works with blades under 30 centimeters long and 5 centimeters wide. It's an ability he's never heard of before, even though he knows the game well. And while then when you attack, it cuts. Effect sounds simple, the activation condition. Oddly specific. A blade shorter than 30 centimeters, like a sashimi knife. With no idea what's expected of him, he prepares for the ceremony, or remembers too late that he still needs equipment. At Joaquin Academy, even the cheapest E-rank weapons cost millions. Anything above C-rank is worth hundreds of millions, and A-rank or S-rank weapons are priceless treasures. The academy itself already costs a fortune. Asking his parents for more money isn't an option, but they require him to bring equipment. So, he shrugs it off and decides to visit any random shop. His solution? Convenience store sashimi knives. After all, Japanese knives are known for being sharp. And a master shouldn't blame their equipment, right? The scene shifts to the entrance ceremony. Someone stares at him and asks, "What exactly did you bring?" Our guy stands there, awkward and silent, surrounded by a pile of sashimi knives. He knows the rules. Anyone who doesn't bring decent equipment gets marked, an easy target for the wealthy students' bullying. The evaluator slams the table, furious, demanding to know if Kong thinks this academy is a joke. Why would anyone bring a pile of kitchen knives here? Kong, maintaining a serious expression, calmly replies that this is his equipment. The professor looks baffled, nearly yelling, but Kong interrupts him, telling him to calm down. He explains that he was accepted through the new special admission system, and his family doesn't have the luxury of buying expensive equipment. Kong points to the badge on his uniform, which clearly indicates he isn't from a wealthy family. To him, it's ridiculous that a professor at an institution claiming to treat everyone equally would act so prejudiced. He adds with confidence that blaming equipment is something only amateurs do. A true expert never blames their weapon. The professor, though stunned, is impressed by the boy's unshakable confidence and wisdom. Reluctantly, he grants admission to Kong, who just thanks him and walks off. In the background, murmurs arise from other students who overheard. Some of them, clearly irritated by the special admission label, mutter insults, even saying Kong stinks. The professor quickly shuts everyone up and orders them to leave once the evaluation ends. Kong doesn't stick around to argue. He dashes out, wanting to avoid these lunatics. Outside, the day has barely begun, yet Kong already feels drained. He expected judgment like this, but living through it still stings. At least he survived the evaluation. Now the only thing left is the classroom qualification test. But he's too far into this to quit. The next 3 years at this academy feel inevitable. As he looks around, he's taken aback by how massive the place is. It's more like a small city than a school. He has to admit though, it's pretty cool. It's surreal for Kong, who dropped out of high school in his old world due to family issues, to be standing here now. Then, a voice over the intercom announces that tests are starting and instructs new students to gather in the training area. Everything feels like it's happening too fast, but a test is a test. Kong is determined to give it his best. Except for one little detail. He's never actually used a knife since coming to this world. He's completely unprepared. He remembers the professor's words, never let go of the knife no matter what. Holding it now, he wonders if the original Kong GM had been slicing sashimi at 2 years old or something. Kong unsheathes the knife and immediately, a blue aura surrounds it. The equipment meets the conditions, activating the blessing of the sword god. However, there's a catch. Kang's physical strength is too low, and the knife itself is at an equally basic level. To compensate, suppression kicks in, synchronizing the equipment with his abilities. Kong stares, amazed that just pulling the knife out triggered the blessing. Before he can process what's happening, something approaches, an overwhelming force that sends him into agony. He starts screaming as reality itself begins to warp around him. It's like he's rupturing the world. Desperately, he drops the knife and everything immediately snaps back to normal. He's left gasping on the ground, clutching his pounding head. So that's what activating the blessing feels like. If every use comes with this much pain, then he can't rely on it at all. The intercom voice drones on, calling students to the training field. Kong hesitates, staring at the knife on the ground. He doesn't want to leave it there, it's still technically his equipment. Summoning his resolve, he picks it up by the handle, only to be struck by another jolt like lightning. He screams again. The scene shifts to the training hall, located in a massive coliseum filled with spectators. Nobles are gathered, whispering about their children entering the academy. All eyes turn to the arrival of someone significant, the Sword Emperor Siegfried von Nibelung. His name alone draws reverence. A messy-haired chubby guy nearby declares Siegfried to be the strongest human alive. Siegfried descends, his gaze shifting sideways. Someone else has arrived, Midia Poison. Her name suits her venomous aura. She greets Siegfried playfully, noting it's been half a century since they last met. He remarks on her academy attire, mocking her for acting senile at 70. She retorts that every woman wishes to stay beautiful, offering to make him 10 years younger with her powers. Siegfried scoffs, saying character is what matters, not appearances. Midia laughs, amused that Siegfried hasn't changed. However, she slyly points out that his presence here signifies something unusual. Normally, Siegfried avoids mingling with the elite. Perhaps, she suggests, it's because of his granddaughter, who is among the new students. Siegfried dismisses the comment, calmly stating that things are about to begin. The artist must have decided to give everyone ridiculous UGO-level hairstyles. Meanwhile, our boy stands there with his plain black hair, wondering if he's the only one with a normal look. Everyone whispers about him being a special admission student. So, this is what it feels like to come from humble origins. Suddenly, there's a flash from the back and the murmurs intensify. Who's arriving now? Oh, the blue-haired girl. He already knew she studied here. Abel von Nibelung, the granddaughter of the sword god and, more importantly, the heroine of that game. The reason he got addicted. Hot and sneaky. The story explains the existence of a subspace, a separate reality where all attacks feel real, and the pain is fully experienced. However, since it doesn't interfere with the actual world, even murder is allowed there. Midia Poison seems a little too enthusiastic about this. The upcoming test is revealed. A battle royale competition inside the subspace. Students will be grouped in tens and their survival will determine their ranks. Midia announces there will be no equipment restrictions, while Siegfried points out this unfairly benefits the wealthy. She counters that the wealthy fund the academy, and the new special admission system was already a huge concession. In the crowd, Kong blushes. She's so much more beautiful in 3D, just looking at her leaves him rattled. Seeing the hopeful gazes of the other guys, he feels sorry for them. He knows the game well. Abel von Nibelung has a miracle blessing. In other words, she's tied to another protagonist. Beautiful people always have someone destined for them, so Kong decides it's best not to get involved. His goal is simple: live a peaceful, ordinary life. Finish school without trouble, get a safe desk job, and that's it. Then a paper catches his eye: heroes earn the highest salaries. But after the agony he felt from drawing that knife earlier, he knows hero work is out of the question. Those roles are for people who can protect the world. He'll stick to his comfortable desk. A crystal in the sky suddenly announces the academy's test, a battle royale. Last one standing receives the star rank. Second and third place earn the dragon rank. Fourth through seventh get the wolf rank. And 8th to 10th? They're labeled common trash. The scoring is automatic and there's no time limit. Kong recognizes it immediately. This is just like the game. His strategy is to avoid drawing attention and finish quickly. A blue energy spreads as the test begins. May the blessing of the heroes be with you. Kang, however, is determined not to use his weapon. Cut to the next scene. Most students are already defeated. The top rankings are announced as 24 groups wrap up. Siegfried observes that this year feels unfair, with Abel and the descendants of the Shang and Jiao families competing. The results were predictable. Abel finishes her match in just 7 minutes and 14 seconds. It doesn't break her grandfather's record, but it's still one of the Academy's top 10 times. Siegfried shrugs it off. It's only natural for a Nibelung descendant to have that talent. With things wrapping up, Siegfried decides to leave. Abel asks if he wants to watch the other descendants, but he dismisses them as a bunch of pigs. Classic humility. He doesn't like nobles at all. Fair enough, he fought in the war and earned his authority. Suddenly the atmosphere shifts. A strange energy surges, startling both Abel and Siegfried. They look up, confused and alarmed. Pieces of the subspace begin to shatter, crashing to the ground and exploding among the students. People panic, wondering if someone fell from the alternate space. A blue light flashes in the sky. Siegfried watches intently as a small knife falls, embedding itself in the ground. Midia immediately calls for medics and orders cadets to help. And lying there, unconscious? Yep, it's Kang. The outcome seems decided already. A blonde noble yells that he'll take Kang out, but another grabs him by the neck and punches him. Kang snaps to his senses, realizing he's now in the middle of the battle royale. Worse, the June brothers are here, infamous for their brutality. Horrified, Kang watches as the brothers torture students for over 30 minutes instead of killing them outright. But why are they leaving him alone? Is he so weak they don't even consider him worth fighting? One of the brothers, holding the blonde noble by the neck, checks if he's dead yet. Then he throws another student to the ground, complaining that it's getting boring. He begins to count the remaining people. He glances at his brother and tells him to slow down, he's killing too quickly. Then he stomps on another person, crushing them underfoot. Sarcastically, he apologizes, saying, "Oops, there goes another one." Pointing to a terrified girl nearby, he says, "You can have her for some fun." The girl freezes in fear. Hiding nearby, Kang is paralyzed. Ever since the torture began, everyone has panicked, but the brother's sadistic behavior hasn't changed. The brother in red begins walking toward the girl. He smirks, saying she's just his type and that he's already imagining the screams coming from her mouth. His brother in blue calls him a pervert, but the red brother insists, "I'm just going to start tearing her apart." Suddenly, a voice shouts out, "You damn bastards." It's Kang, his voice trembling as he calls them out for their psychotic behavior. Even if this is a separate space, this is too much. The brothers pause and turn toward him, curious about who dared to speak up. They quickly notice he's a special admissions student. The red brother sneers and promises to crush Kang's head in an instant. As he advances, he adds that he'll rip Kang's tongue out for the insult. Kang panics, scrambling for a plan. He considers using his pain-nullifying ability, but it only lasts 30 seconds. The brothers have been at this for half an hour. What chance does he have? Then he remembers something, the sashimi knife in his bag. But there's a problem. Activating it will also trigger his blessing. Still, it's his only choice. The brothers hesitate as Kang pulls out the knife, which glows with a faint blue aura. He expects them to be frightened, but instead they burst into laughter. "Are you serious? What's that supposed to do?" Kang glances at the girl. She's alive for now. He steels himself. The red brother laughs again, promising to give Kang a painless death since he's so amusing. Then he lunges, aiming for Kang's head. Kang activates the pain-nullifying ability for 30 seconds, knowing this is his only shot. As the brother mocks him, calling it a kitchen knife, Kang prepares to strike. He knows it's now or never, cut or be killed. He remembers questioning why gangsters always use sashimi knives in movies. Back then he thought it was exaggerated. But now, as the knife slices cleanly through flesh, the brother's laughter turns to a blood-curdling scream. The chubby brother stares in horror as his arm falls to the ground with a heavy thud. A flashback hits. Kang, in a kitchen long ago, once asked his mentor about those movie scenes. His mentor, a former gangster, smacked him and explained, "In real life, skin and organs contract when stabbed. Cutting cleanly? Impossible." But Kang, as clueless as ever, joked that maybe his mentor wasn't skilled enough, earning another smack. Back in the present, the truth speaks for itself. The severed arm lies at Kang's feet while the brother screams, clutching his bleeding stump. In a panic, he turns and bolts toward his sibling, crying for help. But the red-clad brother freezes, his face pale with fear. Snapping out of it, he shouts, "This brat will slice us both up," and charges forward. Kang doesn't hesitate. The blade slices cleanly again as if cutting through paper. The fallen brother watches in horror as his sibling collapses. Looking down, he sees half of his brother's face staring back at him. The air is heavy with shock. A red-haired observer watches silently from the sidelines, stunned by what just happened. The blue brother tries to regain his composure. He reasons that they're in the void space, This must have been a fluke. Judging by Kang's awkward form, he's clearly an amateur. But one thing is clear, that knife is dangerous. Realizing his brother lost due to recklessness, the blue brother prepares. He activates 3 blessings simultaneously: a defensive shield, a jump boost of 200%, and spiritual damage for his fists. With confidence he declares, "This time you're done for." Meanwhile, Kang is still counting down the seconds left on his pain-nullifying ability. The blue brother charges, confident that his fists will crush Kang's head. But suddenly he's stunned, his body freezes. Kang has used him as a target for a throwing knife. The brother stands dazed, not understanding what just happened. Time is almost up. 5 seconds, then 2, then 1. The brother collapses unconscious, and at that exact moment Kang's blessing ends. The pain hits him like a truck and he starts screaming. Sometime later Kang wakes up. He's lying in what looks like a hospital room, disoriented and unsure of how he got there. As Kang gets up, a blonde boy bursts into the room and dashes outside, shouting that the student has woken up. Moments later, someone enters the room and Kang immediately recognizes the man, not personally but from stories. This is Siegfried, one of the 7 heroes of the 7 stars, the strongest man in humanity, and the one who destroyed the Demon Lord's Legion 50 years ago. Accompanying him is Media, the academy director. Kang wonders why 2 such prominent figures are here. Siegfried wastes no time and asks for Kang's name. After Kang introduces himself, Siegfried gets straight to the point, demanding to know what Kang did during the test. Although Kang himself isn't sure, he's painfully aware that he caused everything. He notices Siegfried's hand resting on his sword and feels a wave of dread. There's no way he could survive against someone like him. Nervously, Kang admits he may have gone too far during the evaluation and is prepared to accept the consequences. Siegfried stares him down, but Media interjects, telling Siegfried to stop intimidating the boy. She explains to Kang that Siegfried cleared his meridians while he was unconscious, which stuns Kang further. Media then says she finds him interesting. Siegfried reprimands Media for being so casual, but she brushes him off, saying she reviewed the test footage while Kang was out. She confesses that watching Kang risk everything to protect another student moved her deeply, even calling him a hero. Siegfried, ever the stoic, tells her to act more dignified. Media assures Kang that he won't be punished for his actions, though she mentions that the Mao brothers are on the verge of dropping out. Relieved, Kang feels some weight lift, knowing he won't have to deal with them again. Then Siegfried drops a bombshell. Kang ranked as the top student in the evaluation. Kang is floored. His whole plan was to stay under the radar and live a quiet, uneventful life. Later, in Media's office, she reflects on her 2 decades as academy director, admitting she's never seen anything like this. Meanwhile, Kang expresses his dislike for being named the top student. This surprises both Siegfried and Media. They explain that the subspace itself determines such rankings, but Kang still refuses to accept it. Siegfried, puzzled, wonders aloud how Kang, a seemingly ordinary boy, could possess such extraordinary skills. He admits that if Kang had an incredible physique, immense experience or even natural talent, it would make sense. Yet Kang has none of these. In fact, his untrained body contradicts the master-level swordsmanship he displayed. Siegfried feels an uncharacteristic surge of competitiveness, unable to understand how someone so young could perform at such a level. Media, ever eccentric, teases Siegfried, suggesting Kang might be worth pursuing romantically despite his age. Siegfried, unimpressed, spells out what people at the academy call women like her. Media loses her temper, but the focus shifts back to Kang. Through some maneuvering, Kang manages to get himself downgraded to the wolf class. This is a relief as he had no desire to remain at the top and become a target for power struggles. While some argued for placing him in one of the elite classes, Media ensured the matter stayed quiet, honoring Kang's wish for a low profile. When Kang enters the wolf class, all eyes are on him because of the badge on his chest. After a few moments, the students return to their conversations, allowing Kang to breathe easier. He hopes this means they'll ignore him. As he takes his seat, enjoying the solitude, a voice calls out to him. Turning, he sees the red-haired girl from the test. She thanks him for what he did. Kang brushes it off, saying anyone would have done the same, though deep down he feels like a hypocrite. Everyone sees him as a hero, but in truth he only acted to save himself. Kang introduced himself as Kang Jianma, and the girl introduced herself as Chloe. He politely commented that it was nice to meet her and added that he hadn't expected them to be in the same class. Internally though, he was puzzled. He had played the game countless times and had no memory of a character named Chloe. Since the main story didn't involve her during the Demon Tribe War, he concluded she must be just an ordinary person like himself. Kang asked her to keep what happened earlier a secret and she agreed. Chloe then mentioned she had a question for him, but before she could ask, the professor interrupted, telling everyone to take their seats. They agreed to continue their conversation later. The professor slammed a notebook onto the desk, congratulating the class on their admission and reminding them they carried the pride of the hero Valor Draken. He introduced himself as Lee Won-bin, the instructor for the Wolf class, and ordered everyone to change into their physical training uniforms. Training would begin in 30 minutes. When a boy with glasses asked about the training objective, Kang immediately guessed it: Saitama's regimen. He joked internally, wondering if this meant everyone would eventually go bald. Kang approached the professor, who immediately called him by name, surprising Kang. He explained that he wasn't feeling well. The professor pondered aloud, saying basic training might not benefit the academy's top cadet, and suggested Kang move to the star class. Realizing that media must have informed the instructors, Kang quickly clarified that he just needed to use the bathroom and would return for training. Outside, Kang joined the others in running. Or more accurately, he lagged behind, struggling with his unfit body. He hadn't even finished the warm-up and was already exhausted. Chloe caught up to him, asking if it was really that difficult. Kang denied it, insisting he was fine, though he'd only managed 5 laps, while Chloe casually mentioned she was on her 9th. She encouraged him to keep going and ran ahead, leaving Kang stunned by how unprepared he was. Later, back at home, surrounded by empty bottles, Kang slammed one on the table in frustration. He was completely drained and starving. After just 1 week at the academy, he faced an unexpected problem: food. The scene shifted to the cafeteria, where Kang, desperate for pork, was told by the counter lady that he needed a meal ticket. When he checked the price, 50,000 won, he was devastated. That amount was nearly what he used to spend in an entire month. Frustrated, he leaned against the wall, sipping what little he could afford. Suddenly, a system notification appeared. His physical stats had reached level 12. This meant fewer restrictions and the ability to wield a weapon up to 38 centimeters long. He noticed his body becoming more defined, his evolution progressing rapidly thanks to the sword god's blessing. He realized his fear of using a sword during the ceremony was fading. Now being without one felt strange. As Kang pondered the system's influence on his psyche, someone knocked on the door. It was Chloe, asking politely if she could come in. She noted she hadn't seen him in the cafeteria all week and wanted to check if he was okay. Kang explained he had been bringing food from elsewhere, reassuring her not to worry. Chloe mentioned she was planning to cook dinner but needed to buy ingredients. Before she finished, Kang was already outside, telling her to hurry up. He offered to cook instead, and later, after Chloe finished her meal, she praised how delicious it was. Noticing the empty plates, Kang asked why her fridge was stocked with so much fish. Chloe explained she lived near the beach. Kang remarked that it was perfect, as cooking fish was his specialty. Deciding to show off, he prepared sashimi using the sword god's blessing. With impressive precision, he finished in just 21 seconds, marveling at his own work. When Chloe asked how he became so skilled at cooking, Kang explained he had worked part-time at a Japanese restaurant. Chloe seemed unfamiliar with the concept of part-time work, highlighting their difference in social statuses. Kang simply smiled, saying he was glad she enjoyed the meal. Chloe offered to handle the dishes, leaving Kang to relax after a surprisingly eventful day. He stepped outside to admire the moon, feeling a rare sense of satisfaction after a grueling week. But his peace was interrupted by a sudden noise inside. Turning back, he saw Chloe struggling with the dishes. Clearly, this was her first time attempting such a chore. As he moved to help, a book tumbled from the shelf and landed open. Glancing at it, he realized it was a diary. His curiosity got the better of him and he began reading. One entry caught his attention. She had received help from someone in class and felt indebted to repay the favor. Smiling at the stickers adorning the diary, he thought it was endearing for someone her age. Flipping another page, he read about how her heart wouldn't stop racing whenever she saw the person who helped her. It dawned on him that she was talking about him. Amused, he turned another page only to find it filled with "I love you" scrawled over and over. Alarmed, Kang thought it might be time to quietly slip away. But Chloe had already noticed. Dropping a glass, she stared at him in shock and demanded to know if he had read it. The scene shifts to Chloe's backstory. Born into the infamous Cecilia family, she was trained from childhood to be an assassin. In their tradition, emotions were weaknesses, suppressed through rigorous conditioning. By the age of 15, Chloe had taken her first life. The family motto drilled into her was clear: assassins don't deny their talents. Despite her skill, the Cecilia family insisted their children keep a low profile at the academy, always enrolling in the lower-ranked common classes. Chloe accepted her fate, believing it was impossible to break free. Her life seemed predictable, until Kang appeared. During a subspace trial meant to test her resolve, she was prepared to face death calmly as she always had. But Kang disrupted the narrative. He yelled at her attackers, standing between her and harm. In that moment, Chloe saw something she had never experienced: someone fighting for another person. The memory of childhood fairy tales flashed in her mind, and for the first time, her heart raced uncontrollably. Was this love? Back in the present, the atmosphere between them grew tense. Kang, awkward and clueless, tried to shift the mood by commenting on the beauty of the night and thanking her for the meal. As he turned to leave, Chloe stopped him. "Did you see it?" she asked, her voice sharp. Feigning ignorance, he stammered, "See what?" But Chloe pressed on. He tried to deflect, mentioning the book and hoping she'd let it go. She didn't. Realizing there was no escape, Kang admitted he had read the diary. The air around her changed instantly. Chloe's demeanor grew cold as she reached for her sword. Kang's mind raced. He was on the 4th floor with no chance of jumping out the window. The only exit was through the door, but she stood between him and it. As she dragged her sword along the ground, her eyes lifeless and her movements mechanical, he realized she had entered an entirely different state, one far more dangerous. She wasn't the shy, awkward girl he had spoken to moments ago. This was her assassin side, awakened and intent on eliminating him. Piecing things together, Kang understood her diary was the trigger, and now her lethal instincts were in full control. He needed a plan. His sashimi knife was in his room, but the only nearby weapon was a box cutter on the table. Chloe lunged. Kang snatched the box cutter, regretting that it had come to this. All he could do now was defend himself and hope for a chance to break through her icy resolve. Kang activated the sword god's blessing, hearing the familiar phrase, "May the blessing be with you." As Chloe charged at him, he made an offhand remark about her hair being too long. With a single clean strike, the scene shifted and Chloe was lying unconscious on the floor. When she woke, she seemed dazed, muttering about where Gemma had gone. Her memories were fragmented. She recalled glancing at him by the window while washing dishes and wondered where her katana was. Spotting it nearby, she felt relieved but also remembered how she often lost consciousness after wielding it. Typically, her only memory after such moments was the old man's voice, praising her talent as an assassin. Collapsing face first onto her pillow, Chloe groaned in frustration. She had fainted at the worst possible time, while he was in her room. Her mind raced as she wondered if she had said anything embarrassing. Then she noticed the box cutter on the floor and touched her hair, realizing it was shorter. Confused, she checked the trash and saw the strands he had trimmed. As unstable as she was, Chloe interpreted this as an act of kindness. To her, he had been considerate enough to give her a haircut. Feeling touched, she opened her diary and began writing a heartfelt entry about how much she adored Gemma. Meanwhile, outside, Kang was throwing up. The blessing had saved his life, but he had overused its effect, burning through 5 extra seconds beyond the 9-second limit. Completely drained, he slumped onto a bench, lamenting how even the energy from dinner was gone. He started reflecting on Chloe's fighting style. Unlike most swordsmen who aim to disarm or incapacitate, Chloe's every move was designed to kill. Her strikes targeted vital points with terrifying precision, like a trained ambush specialist. Fighting her, Kang had genuinely feared for his life and instinctively aimed to counter with a lethal blow. Thankfully, the box cutter's short blade only managed to give her a haircut. Though she had fainted afterward, Kang was grateful the situation resolved itself. Life at the academy was proving far more dangerous than he had anticipated. Sitting there, Kang thought back to his life before falling into this world. He had been ambitious, a master of sashimi knives who had reached the pinnacle of his craft. Now, in this game-like world, everyone seemed bound by their roles. The game was called Blessing of Miracles, named after the legendary blessing granted to the protagonist. Another blessing, Valor, was tied to Baylor Joachim. As far as Kang could remember, these 2 blessings were central to the story. The protagonist's mission was straightforward: save the world from the Demon King. But Kang? He had been chosen by a sashimi knife. Slapping himself in frustration, he tried to make sense of his predicament. The events at the academy were making him lose sight of his original goals. While he knew the key characters and major story beats, he didn't fully understand how this world worked. What he did know was that the game's main storyline was about to begin. The protagonist's blessings should have activated by now, signaling their arrival at the academy. According to the storyline, major events would escalate in the 2nd semester of the 3rd year. That's when the demon race would attack the academy, igniting a war between demons and humanity. This conflict would eventually spiral into a full-scale world war. Kang couldn't deny the story's cliches. Back when he played the game, he had quit halfway through, finding it predictable despite its challenges. But now, living in this world, the looming war felt terrifyingly real. The question wasn't if it would happen, it was whether he could survive it. For now, Kang had 3 days to prepare. He could either find a way to escape this world or, failing that, grow stronger to endure it. Somewhere in this chaos, he hoped for a happy ending. After all, the protagonist would surely survive, but Kang needed power to protect himself. Yet he couldn't draw too much attention, or he'd be dragged into the front lines against the Demon King's army. The day's events taught him he needed to be more cautious when using the Blessing of Pain. Checking his stats, he noted that his performance was better than expected. Strangely, the interface seemed to reveal more information each day. While stats like mental strength made sense, the assimilation rate stat puzzled him. Clicking on it only brought up a message: access restricted. The more he tried to unravel the mysteries of this world, the more questions arose. But one thing was clear: he needed a real weapon. Relying on a box cutter and the Blessing of Pain for 30 seconds wasn't going to cut it anymore. He needed a sword that wouldn't activate the blessing. Luckily, he remembered that next month's exams offered a reward, Murasame, a rank B blade. If he could master it, it would be sufficient to graduate from the academy. Its design ensured the sword god's blessing wouldn't trigger, making it an ideal primary weapon. Of course, this meant more effort than he wanted to put in, but there wasn't much choice. As he sat, someone called out and he turned to see a girl with cyan-colored hair. It was obvious who she was. Looking battered, she boldly claimed the bench as hers. Kang just stared at her, dumbfounded and unsure how to respond. "Say something, man," she yelled again, telling him to move aside. Caught off guard, Kang couldn't help but notice how surreal she looked, even after seeing her multiple times. Spacing out for a moment, he was about to get up when she clarified that he didn't need to leave, just sit next to her. Even though she was stunning, her claim about the bench being hers was ridiculous. It was public space after all. Deciding it was best to avoid any unnecessary interaction, Kang stayed quiet, hoping to steer clear of the protagonist's storyline. Still, her beaten-up appearance caught his attention, and he found himself glancing at her, marveling at her beauty despite her condition. Out of nowhere, she mentioned that the stars were most visible from this spot. Her sudden comment left Kang scrambling for words, his lack of social skills painfully evident. Was this really Abel? The granddaughter of the sword saint and the protagonist known for being hard to approach? She turned to him asking if he used the sword. Kang, confused, wondered how she knew. She explained that her grandfather had told her that swordsmen have a certain look in their eyes. For a moment, Kang worried that she might have figured out his secret. Abel then asked if he wanted to hold her sword, making it clear she knew he recognized her. Kang found it odd. Why would she bother asking that when everyone at the academy knew who she was? He admitted he sort of knew her, to which she replied that she didn't know him. Her bluntness only added to his confusion. She commented that it was a cliché for someone to know her name while she didn't know theirs. Kang, uninterested in getting involved, questioned why he should share his name with someone he'd just met. Abel explained it was always good to know people. You never knew who might be a spy for the Demon King. She added that it was suspicious for him to be alone in a spot where she usually trained. Realizing he was being indirectly threatened, Kang quickly turned the tables, suggesting she could be the spy. Abel clarified that she was there to train. Kang responded that he was doing the same. Curious, Abel asked what kind of training he was doing to remain so calm. Kang said it was breathing exercises. Noticing the wounds on her hands, he complimented her dedication. Abel confirmed that people didn't understand the pressure of carrying Siegfried's bloodline. She explained that she needed to be perfect because any sign of weakness would attract opportunists. This year she admitted she wasn't the top student. It was the first time she had been defeated, and while it was frustrating, she also found it oddly relieving. However, she was determined to find out who had surpassed her and defeat them next time. Kang asked if it was worth taking so seriously. Abel replied that it was a matter of pride. She even begged her grandfather to reveal the person's identity, only to learn they weren't even in her class. The worst part? They had just joined the academy. Realizing she was oversharing, Abel apologized, saying she shouldn't talk about such things with someone she'd just met. Intrigued, Kang asked why she was telling him all this. Abel replied it was because he seemed weak. Her family's motto was to be firm with the strong and kind to the weak. Finally understanding her kindness, Kang realized she thought he was trash. Well, that explained why she was so difficult to approach in the game. Deciding it was time to leave, Kang wished her a good night. As he turned to go, she demanded his name. The scene shifted to the classroom. Life at the academy was calmer than Kang expected. Chloe had quickly made new friends and blended into the class, while Kang did his best to avoid eye contact. Whenever she approached Kang, her friends would cast judgmental looks. But Kang didn't care. Likely because he was a special student. And besides, he wasn't the only one in the Tiger class this year. Kang thought it was a relief he ended up in this class. At the start of the semester, the Star and Dragon classes would usually form political factions. Even in the game, that nonsense had annoyed him. Now he was glad he didn't have to deal with it. Walking with his phone in hand, Kang wondered what to eat. That's when Medea handed him a black card, apologizing for forgetting to give it earlier. Apparently it was her personal card. Kang was stunned. So this is what being a sugar baby feels like, he thought. Still, the best part was that he hadn't disrupted the flow of events so far. If he kept this pace for the next 3 years, the future he envisioned might come true. Despite this optimism, the war looming ahead was never far from his mind. Later, in class, a professor lectured about a war 700 years ago between the Demon King and the hero of Wacken. Afterward, Draken founded the academy with his 7 disciples to prepare future heroes. The professor emphasized this would be on the test, but Kang was nearly falling asleep. He already knew the story. Jaqen Baylor, the founder, had fought demon commanders for 20 years, leading humanity against the demon army. In the end, he lost an arm and could no longer fight. The war ended in a bloody stalemate, resulting in a fragile truce between humans and demons. Jaqen then established the academy to ensure peace. The professor reminded the students that this truce was why they had peace today. But Kong knew better. Those 700 years of peace were about to end. As the lecture wrapped up, Kong wondered if he should tell Medea. But what consequences would that bring? Medea often seemed like she wanted to leave the academy as soon as possible, but Abel was the first to awaken, an anomaly thanks to the Lord Poet. She was also the first of the 7 heroes to step forward and protect the students. Unfortunately, Kong also knew her fate. She would be the first to be sacrificed by the Demon King. He wished he didn't know that. The professor ended class, reminding everyone about the upcoming exam in 2 weeks. As students left, they chatted about something exciting. Kong stayed behind trying to recall what it was. Then it hit him. It was May 5th. He overheard students by the door saying someone wasn't destined for their class but for the star class. Kong knew exactly who they meant. Today marked the arrival of the protagonist of this world, Leon von Reinhardt. With him came the end of 700 years of peace. Kong already hated Leon with his ridiculously cliché face and the way every woman fell for him. If only this were an R-rated story where guys like Leon met early, tragic ends. Leon's charisma had already drawn in Rachel, the Saint of the Sword, Saki Ryojo, the daughter of the Saint of the Bow, and even Abel. His party members were extraordinary. Despite Kang's disdain, Leon's blessing of miracles made him humanity's first choice for the hero's journey. Except calling it a choice was generous. People were forced to join the war. Kong remembered that even the legendary hero Valor had only managed to defeat the Legion's first commander. Imagining the strength of the true Demon King was surreal. Leon walked into the classroom, greeting students with his radiant smile. Then he noticed Kong and flashed him a grin too. Kong immediately sensed something off but reminded himself of what the blessing of miracles could do. He was sure Leon would handle everything. Leon's trustworthy aura made it seem like he could solve any problem. Suddenly the scene shifted. Kong was at the training hall swinging a sword. Since it was a longer blade, the blessing of the sword god didn't activate, allowing him to practice uninterrupted. He desperately needed to master the basics of swordsmanship. Earlier, Rachel had approached him, asking if she'd done something wrong. Kong almost lost his composure but kept calm since they'd be stuck together for at least a year. He assured her everything was fine and she looked relieved. But Kong was still confused, trying to piece together her identity. There was also the mystery of how she could wield a sword even when unconscious. Her expression seemed to cry for help, yet her sword radiated murderous intent. If it came to killing, Rachel might be more dangerous than even the notorious evil brothers. Rachel apologized for what had happened earlier and offered to make it up to Kong by cooking him another dinner. She promised to do her best, even if her cooking wasn't as good as his. Kong hesitated, vividly recalling her wielding a sword. The problem was the way she seemed to glow as she begged. It was hard to refuse. But in his mind he pictured himself waking up in the morning, sliced into pieces and stuffed in the fridge. That's when an idea struck him. Instead of dinner, he asked if she could do him a favor. Rachel looked puzzled and Kong explained it was something only she could help with. Blushing, she asked what it was. Kong then requested her help with swordsmanship training. At the training hall, Kong realized how urgently he needed a teacher. Chloe with a sword in hand was terrifying. Every night before bed he'd watch YouTube videos on how to survive Yandras. When Chloe arrived, cheerful as ever, she asked when he'd gotten there. Kong, already on edge, replied he had just arrived. Chloe mentioned she'd been waiting for him since 6:30. Kong frowned, reminding her they'd agreed to meet at 8. Her innocent expression didn't fool him, and he was reminded of her unhinged nature. Still, his attention momentarily drifted to her toned abs, finally understanding the source of her strength. Chloe handed him a sword and asked why they weren't using real ones. Kong was stunned. Who trains with a real sword? He explained that, since it was just practice, wooden swords were safer. Chloe gave him a sweet smile and said he was kind for not wanting to hurt her. Then she swung the wooden sword, slicing through the air with a sharp whoosh. Kong broke into a cold sweat, realizing even a wooden sword could shatter his skull. He checked the system, relieved the blessing of the sword god hadn't activated. Yet, the synchronization stat still confused him. Chloe called out, asking if something was wrong. Kong quickly reminded himself only he could see the system. Turning to her, he said, "It's my first day, so maybe go easy on me." Preparing himself, Kong asked if they could start. In his past life he had always valued practice. He believed that mastery required more than just physical effort. It demanded total dedication. At the academy, his progress came from observing himself and learning to self-correct. He noticed his sweaty palms and unsteady stance. Reminding himself that swordsmanship required precision, he braced for the training. But Chloe leaped toward him. Kong wasn't fully prepared and the blade was already near his neck. It wasn't clear if he dodged or if the blade nicked his cheek. Panicking, he yelled, asking why she wasn't going easy on him. Chloe, unfazed, switched the blade to her other hand and prepared another strike. Kong managed to block it, but the force sent his arm flying upward, leaving him trembling. Feeling a surge of confidence after the block, he attempted a counter-strike. But before he could land it, Chloe was already airborne. Kang found himself questioning how Chloe kept getting faster with every move. Perhaps her first attack had been just a warm-up. He blocked again, but the force cracked the wooden hilt, sending him stumbling backward. Chloe's relentless barrage continued. Though Kang managed to hold his defense, each strike made him fear for his life. Worse, he couldn't find any opening to counterattack. Suddenly his wooden sword shattered. Chloe apologized, saying she didn't mean to break it, but admitted she hadn't thought it was so fragile. Then she froze. The broken sword's altered length activated the blessing of the sword god. The system kicked in, reshaping Kang's personality and reducing his humanity. A dark aura enveloped him as the heat activated, and Chloe instinctively backed away, visibly terrified. The system coldly announced Kang's humanity was slipping away. In the midst of this transformation, Kang's perception shifted. He was now standing in his old kitchen under a bright spotlight. Confused, he wondered if everything had been a dream. Noticing a fish on the counter, he remembered he was supposed to prepare it. Thinking he'd used the chef's Chinese knife, the system interrupted, rejecting his choice. Trying another knife, he faced the same denial. In the end, his only option was the sashimi knife. Reluctantly, he picked it up, fearing the pain the system might inflict. But instead, he felt rejuvenated. Determined, he declared it was time to create a masterpiece as the heat activated fully. Meanwhile, back in the training hall, Chloe was shouting his name, asking if he was okay. Kang, pacing aimlessly, suddenly vanished in a flash of blue light and reappeared in front of Chloe in an instant. She barely managed to block his attack, but the impact sent her flying, crashing to the ground and coughing up blood. Chloe, shaken, realized Kang had become an entirely different person in mere moments. His behavior now resembled a deranged protagonist's. When Kang struck again, she dodged narrowly, struggling to comprehend how a single hit had overpowered her. Weak and unable to stand properly, Chloe begged him to stop. Inside Kang's mental world, he was baffled. The fish on the counter was now dodging his cuts and, even more bizarrely, speaking. Listening closely, he realized it was calling his name, Jima. Looking at the sashimi knife, Kang remembered who he was. Then, as if awakening from a dream, he recognized the fish as Chloe pleading for him to regain control. The blade slammed into the wall beside her, missing by a hair. Kang, barely managing to stop himself, let go of the sword just before it struck her. Chloe opened her eyes, stunned she wasn't hurt. Kang suddenly pulled her by the waist. For a moment, it seemed like a setup for a kiss, but instead he told her they should stop for the day. Chloe asked if he was okay, but Kang casually thanked her for the practice and walked away. She couldn't believe this lunatic had almost killed her and then left as if nothing had happened. Later, as Chloe returned to her room, she reflected on the day. Kang's power wasn't just raw strength, it carried an unusual, almost instinctive energy. Even with the broken sword, she realized she had no chance against him. Suddenly, a voice interrupted her thoughts. Knox Audier, a second-year student she addressed as her brother, commented on her enjoyment. Chloe's demeanor shifted instantly. Knox mocked her, asking if she was now associating with insignificant people like Kang. Chloe snapped back, telling him not to insult others. Smirking, Knox warned that if she continued spending time with Kang, the Audier family would eliminate him. Lowering her head, Chloe retorted that even if the entire family came after Kang, they wouldn't be able to defeat him. Without waiting for a reply, she walked away. Knox remained behind, pondering Kang's name. Meanwhile, Kang was beginning to realize that his power wasn't a blessing or divine favor. It felt more like a curse. Determined to stop relying on the sword god's dangerous influence, he resolved to find new equipment. Yet the strange power seemed to defy his will, controlling his body and urging him to cut deeper, destroy more. For a fleeting moment, he lost all control, feeling utterly free yet bound like a puppet. It was only Chloe's desperate scream that finally snapped him back to reality. He glimpsed fragments of another reality and instinctively let go of the sword, breaking its hold over him. His body seemed to know that holding onto the blade any longer would mean losing himself forever. Strangely enough, it was Chloe, the Yandra girl who once wanted to kill him, who snapped him back to his senses. While part of him resented that the power had activated because Chloe broke the sword, he couldn't deny his gratitude. He left quickly, but the question lingered: how could he prevent this power from ever awakening again? This so-called blessing from the sword god was far more of a curse. Kang began to realize that activating it came at the cost of pieces of his life.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, it really helps. And for more content like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see another part. I'd love to hear your thoughts. See you next time. Bye-bye.